If I were a rich man with a million or two, I'd live in a penthouse in a room with a view. And if I were handsome, those dreams do come true. Wouldn't have nothing if I couldn't part with you. Couldn't have nothing if I didn't part with you. Bop ba da ba da ba da, yada ba bop.
You know, in terms of Randy Newman bangers, this one might be better
Horribly
than
underrated.
this one. I might rate this one a little higher than You've Got a Friend.
Here's the thing. I think Randy Newman is weirdly become underrated in how good he was for those early Pixar movies of like
Right.
perfectly capturing the mood of a movie with his song.
Scene by scene.
But-
like,
Yes.
I mean, he was doing
But-
Phil Collins before.
Yeah, I think. Look, You Got a Friend in Me is literally like the start of the
It's
movie
the
and the start of
quintessential-
Pixar, so it kind of gets
Yeah.
canonized.
right.
It's like I can't believe we're starting with this. Okay, so it's like someone once described the difference between Godfather and Godfather 1. It's like, look, Godfather 2 in so many ways feels like it's just better. It's richer, it's deeper, it covers so much more time and gives you so much like of a richer context of like these characters and their struggles and why they act the way they do. But the first one is just so damn iconic. Like every
Right.
quote you make is almost certainly the first one. Cuz like take the gun, leave the cannoli, sleeping with the fishes, make an offer I can't refuse,
Right.
day of my daughter's wedding. Like all the iconic stuff,
Yeah.
like horse head, is in the first one. Whereas the second one is just a good movie.
Right.
And like, but it's less quotable. And I kind of feel like it's like that with You Got a Friend in Me and this song. Because it's like, that's in the movie. It's like the iconic opening. Whereas this is like the credit song.
Well, okay, let's do our intro and then I'll follow up with my rebuttal there.
Okay, yes. Welcome back to the Disney Desk, everyone. I'm Carter.
And I'm Sydney. Welcome to the Patreon party.
Woo! Welcome to what's probably going to be one of the top, like, including the time we both just drank a lot. This will be
Yeah.
one of the more chaotic Patreon parties.
Yes.
To bring you inside baseball a little bit, we are recording this a little later than usual, so we're a little loopy.
Right, yeah, we've had time to meditate on this one. We wanted to do something spooky for Patreon this month, and by the time you're hearing this, hopefully you have already heard our Scooby-Doo episode on the main channel. But today we are covering the Monsters, Inc. franchise, something we haven't mentioned at all on our channel yet.
If we mention it, it's more just, like, in historical
Passing?
context.
Yeah,
Or, in nonchalant
right.
reference. To the point where I didn't even think about it in the context of Halloween until you brought it up. You just randomly go, like, why don't we do the monster? Because I think I brought Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
And then you brought Monsters, Inc. And I was like, great, awesome. That's an entire week of, like, bangers.
Right, exactly. So yes, today we are covering Monsters, Inc. The Good, the Bad, the Scary, the...
Harry?
Yeah, it had to be said.
These movies are actually pretty gross. Like, I forgot,
Oh,
like...
yeah. There's a lot to go over here. But, like, So, I really like the point you just made, because we're just diving in. Welcome.
Yeah, this is gonna be, like... We're not, like I even said, I didn't do my usual, like, robust, like, here's the history of this movie and all, like, the technical
Right.
context. I'm like, let's just talk about these
talk about
movies,
the movies.
because no one
Yeah.
talks about these movies
They
inexplicably.
Don't. And it's something that's just, like, omnipresent. Like, it's always there in everyone's mind. I've never heard anybody say they don't love these, but they don't
Right.
really get referenced very frequently the way that Finding Nemo and A Toy Story would. Now,
Right.
what you just described about, like, comparing You've Got a Friend in Me to, what's the song called? I Wouldn't Have Nothing?
If I
like-
didn't have you.
If I Didn't Have You. Oh, yeah. I would actually say I would say that, like, that phenomenon you just described would carry over into those franchises and, like, in general of, like, if Toy Story was really, what's the word, like, really mapping out, really fine-tuning, like, the sort of buddy cop, like, Pixar friendship story for boys that's kind of boy-coded, then, like if Toy Story is the perfected version of that, then, like, Monsters Inc. is just another example of like a formula that was
Right.
already clearly,
Yeah.
cleanly
It's sort of a
padded
more
out.
laid back. It's like
Yes.
a chiller, laid back version, especially because by this time. So to give you guys, I guess, a little bit of like historical context, like the Pixar canon at this point was Toy Story came out in '95, Bugs Life came out in '98, Toy Story 2 came out in '99, which was like that thing was chaos incarnate, and then Monsters Inc. in '01. I do think it's interesting that you say like Toy Story is a refined version of this because like rewatching the first Monsters Inc. This is the most Pixar movie that ever Pixar.
It truly
Like
is. I was gonna
where
say that. Like, in terms, we talk about Pixar, like, doing this, like, insane world building. I think this is actually the first example of, like, thorough world building. Because before we were just in a child's bedroom, and that was kind of it.
right, and Bugs Life doesn't really like it has a lot going on, but I don't really think of it as like refined or polished.
No.
And like I guess again, I love I say not giving historical context, and then I just do
And then
anyway.
yeah.
But like this is the first one that was animated like a normal film, for lack of a
Right.
better word. Because, like, Toy Story 95, like, John Lasseter gets the director credit for Toy Story, Bugs Life, and Toy Story 2. But by all accounts, those films, like, especially, you know, once Lasseter got kicked out of the company and they could just be more candid about these things, like, by all accounts, it was everyone directed it, and he only got director credit because he was the head of the company and you need to put someone's name as director. Where it was like everyone doing everything all of the time, trying to make this thing work. Basically, especially with the first Toy Story, trying to build a plane before the concept of flight existed and be like, wait, can we actually get humans off the ground?
Right.
I guess we're going to find out.
Right.
And then Toy Story 2 being this, like, and Bugs Life basically being the same thing. And just when they think they finally figured it out and can settle down, Disney's like, you have to make Toy Story 2. Like, Disney tried to make it on their own. It was a disaster. They lost a lot of the files. And basically, Pixar's like, we can give you a better version of this in a year. And it almost killed all of them. Monsters, Inc. is the first time it's like, okay, we have a dedicated one person who's the director. This is Pete Docter's first directing credit, which makes sense because, again, he is Mr. Pixar. Like, once Lasseter got kicked out, he became the face of the company. And, you know, he did this, he did Inside Out. Like, he does a lot of the ones that really do have those, like, robust world-building elements. This is the first one that has, like, dedicated animators for all of the characters, where it's like, no, your job is to just animate this one character.
Right.
And I think so much of that just shows in the refinement. Like, in terms of, like, this film just feels so much more polished than what had come before it in terms of, like,
Yeah.
okay, everyone had some room to breathe. This isn't just talent now. This is, like, technique as well.
And you know, it's so interesting to hear that like there's this kind of like maturity on the production end of it. I like would it be a stretch to say that that kind of mirrors the more sort of like mature subject matter? It's not that the subject matter is mature, but it's definitely like a grown-up story. And it is it Pixar's first like more story about people who are kind of adults, like operating adult lives.
You know, it's interesting because, like, I feel like Pixar's, like, claim to fame, especially early on, was they made films for men about men.
Right.
You know, like, you know, Toy Story is about a cowboy and a space ranger fighting to be the surrogate daddy of a
Right.
kid.
Of a young
you
boy.
know. Yeah. Bugs Life is samurai movie, but what if
Right.
Bugs, though? Finding Nemo
Right.
is dad and person with mental health problems finding his kid.
Right.
You know, and then obviously Incredibles. Whereas Monsters Inc. is like, yeah, it's a workplace.
It's
like
a workplace comedy. Yes.
It's got this jazzy vibe. Like so much of like the background noise.
It's
is
very
like,
Cheers. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah, exactly. Like there's a whole bit where one of the main characters is trying to have a date with his like girl who's like, I think he's the one.
Sylvia. Yeah.
Sylvia. What a design. Truly all-time great voice to design concept of
Yeah.
this like raspy Betty Boop voice with snake hair.
who are all like sentient. Like all of her snakes
Yes,
are
who all have their own personality.
Right.
Who, when she says they're gonna get cut, all have a look like, and I'm
Right.
like, what? Do they die?
right, exactly.
Yeah, and like it's especially because like the beginning of this film is literally them just going to work.
Mm-hmm.
there's so much like lore about Pixar in terms of like their story team. The idea of like they really do not animate a single thing until they're 100% sure this is the story they want to tell. Like the storyboards are perfect. Like, you know, and like we haven't talked a lot about the whole Spider-Verse thing, about like how chaotic that production was and how it like really pushed a lot of animators to the brink, and that's because they like huge chunks of the story were like committed to at the 11th hour, where it's like, oh, you're just throwing out all this animation. Like, Pixar doesn't do that. Their model is, like, very strict. Like, the storyboards and the script have to be 100% locked before we do any animation.
Interesting.
And I think this is why they got such a reputation of these are the masters of storytelling for kids' films. They are, like, they have it down to a science. Because it really is. The opening of this movie is so good. And you really do realize, within 10 minutes, you understand every single thing you need to know about the movie.
Right.
Because the opening is this cool, moody sequence where we have, like, a monster sneaking into a kid's bed. He's about to scare him. And then it just becomes this silly slapstick bit where we're like, oh, this is, like, a workplace?
A test, yeah.
Yeah, we're
a crash
secretly
dummy
showing the
test.
audience... Yeah, we're secretly showing the audience how the conflict is going to be resolved, like how they're going to beat the bad guy.
Right.
We introduce the bad guy, but you don't know it
Off
yet.
the top,
and you basically,
But you think he's the
you
good
basically
guy.
get the yes, exactly. You get the whole conflict of the world.
Right.
It's a metaphor. You know, there's a power shortage, and we have to get this dangerous power resource, even though it's wrong. It's also
Right.
like I think that's a part of it. The adult thing. It's a weirdly political movie.
That's interesting. It is, in a weird way. It's like, I don't know what to compare it to, but like it's got this, oh god, am I about to reference 9/11? But in this like our heroes, like people doing their job, but like we consider them heroes. Especially with this like ad, this TV ad that they're doing, and that's kind of reflected by them like walking through chat, like
We scare because we care.
because we care. Yeah, exactly.
Which is, well, it's weird that they were on the zeitgeist, because this came out, like, November 2001.
Right.
And also just, like, the metaphor of, like, oil. These guys get
Yeah.
this dangerous resource that's toxic if you touch it, when in reality there's better options that aren't as exploitative to,
Right.
like,
Others.
underprivileged people.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this movie, and, like, yeah, I also... Okay. I know we're bouncing around, but, like,
Right.
I'm just thinking about, like, Sully and Mike as a duo. Is it bad? I can't say I like them better than Buzz and Woody, right? Like, that's just against the law.
Why not?
Right?
At least they like each other.
Yeah, I do think that's what's so interesting. 'cause
Alleviates
again,
a lot of
like,
the stress. I think Toy Story has some genuinely stressful moments of two people that are like at each other's throats for kind of no reason. I've always thought that Toy Story was stressful.
Well, it's also because, yeah, it's so weird to have, like, competency in your characters, because, like, the whole
Right.
thing with Toy Story is they're so they're so tiny.
Right.
Like, every single... Getting from a gas station to a pizza place is like
Yeah.
a fucking odyssey. Whereas,
Right.
like, when we are introduced to Sully and Mike, they're, like, goofing around, they're, like, training.
They're
already kind of at the
they're
top
at the
of
top
the world.
of their game. Like
Right.
they are QB1 essentially.
Yeah, exactly. They figured it out. Like,
Right.
they're, like, sports stars. They
Right,
get an
exactly.
advertisement. Mike Wazowski, like, gets blocked off by the logo, and yet he's still, like, I'm
He's
on
like,
TV!
that was beautiful. And then I
Yes.
always forget the bit where he answers the phone and it's Sully's family and he's like, "Did you see me?" That's a good payoff.
I think it's less that I love them as a duo, but that Mike Wazowski might be a top 3 or 4 Pixar character for me, because he's just kind of everything. It's hilarious that there's, like, a monster who's, like, a micromanager, who, like, doesn't scare,
Right.
but he, like, handles all of, like, the logistics. It's Billy
Exactly.
Crystal at his most Billy Crystal-y.
Yes.
Again, like, Pixar is so good at, like, picking, like, a B-level, like, actor and perfectly
Comedian.
identifying...
Yeah.
Perfectly identifying, like, how to bring their personality to an 11.
Right.
I think it's funny that he has a Polish last name. I'm like, yeah, finally, Polish representation in the monster community. Hooray! Eastern Europeans, rejoice!
I love I'm sorry, but it's like that sort of adds to the like I don't know what it adds to, but it's like it's hilarious that they are monsters and their names are not like slimy, sleemy creepy
Right.
crawler, and they're Randy. Their names are Michael,
James. Yeah, they
Sylvia.
just have very domestic names. Sylvia.
Bill.
Mike.
Isn't his name? Isn't Sully's first name like William or something? Like
James
James
P.
P. Sullivan. Yeah, like they are so Caucasian.
Right? It's yes, it's very no, it's just very like New York, which just adds
Yes,
to the like
exactly.
weird jazziness of it.
Right, right.
And somehow Mike Wazowski is the funniest name for a bunch of little children to say.
Right, exactly. Which that's, by the way, like I wanted to bring that up at some point. This sort of poignant use of like realistic child voice, because it's always a choice in animation. You always have a choice between like, do I want to cast real children or do I want to cast voice actors, like
Right.
adult voice actors? And it's like we have there are certain examples of that like really paying off. It's not always appropriate, but you have things like Bluey where that like really pays
Where,
off.
like,
If
I don't
you've got
think
something,
it works otherwise.
yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. Bluey wouldn't work otherwise, and I think this is a story where like you have to, this is the first time, like as many times as I've seen this movie, that I've sort of poignantly like paid attention to the presence of children in the movie, not just the human children, but like the in-universe like monster children. And in my mind, I'm like, what is the difference?
Right.
Do you know
And
what
like
I
that's
mean?
yeah, and again, I think again that's why like again Pixar gets this reputation of like, man, these guys are geniuses because there's so many little, even on top of just like the beat for beat story stuff, there's so many little things that they introduce to you like that where it's like you didn't
Right.
notice this, but your brain did.
Right. You'll remember this in 20 years.
Yeah, you'll think about like that'll make it feel thematically richer, even though it's only 90 minutes long.
Right, exactly.
Like honestly, my big example of that was like how pointed, like it really dawns on you. You never see Sully scare until like the like emotional climax of the film. Pointedly, every time he does it, and almost any time anyone does, it's off screen.
Right, yeah.
Like even Randall, like we just hear them go into the room. There's a scream. You see that.
you see the thing, yeah.
Yeah.
The canister.
Yeah. Again, iconic. Like again,
Okay,
It's
we'll
the
have to
master-
circle back to design.
Yeah, we'll have to. Yeah, design gets its whole little section.
Right.
But like, yeah, because like 90% of what we see of Sully is he's like kind of like the lovable, not a doof, but he's kind of like laid
He's a
back. You know,
himbo.
again, he's at the top of his game. He doesn't
Right.
game. He doesn't have to stress out about anything.
Right,
Or he's in
exactly.
like elaborate physical comedy bits.
Right, exactly.
So like, you realize, oh, this is the first time we're seeing someone successfully scare a kid, and you're like, oh, right, this is why this is why this kid is terrified of Randall, because
Right.
this is actually really horrifying to happen to a kid.
Right, exactly.
God, there's so many different angles we can take this from. Like, yeah, and even just like you were talking about, like the fleshed out world building of it, just like it's so fun. Like, again, in terms of storytelling, setup, and payoff, the
Right.
fact that we set up like, oh, there's all these, they have like literally a giant wall indicating like what time zone there is, and
Yeah.
the idea of like, oh, right, there are literally kids all around the world, and we have this basically Chekhov's gun of like, oh, all of these doors are coming down, but where are all the doors? Which gives you like this incredible sequence with like an entire room filled with doors, like an entire roller
Right.
coaster of doors.
Right, like a
it's so
storage
devious
facility.
how they just build up to that, where it's like, okay, we see one bedroom, then we see a bunch of doors on the floor, then we see an entire warehouse of doors,
Right.
and suddenly all of them are activated.
Right. It's so fascinating to be like to go back to like the idea of this like elaborate world building. I feel like this film spends so much time in its own world before like you get sort of swept away into like the quest, so to speak.
Right.
Like which is like kind of fascinating to me. I feel like it sets it apart. Again, like I feel like this is just going to be us comparing this to Toy Story, but it's
Well, because this is one of their first two
mirrors-
franchises.
right, exactly. I think it mirrors Toy Story in so many ways, but I feel like we kind of bounce back and forth between Andy's room and other places or other, or because like Andy's room like never really functions like a city, like it is like it's an ecosystem, but like we see it in such a zoomed in scope that like it's different than like seeing Mike and Sully like go to a restaurant.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, like so much of, because you're in this fisheye lens, you don't really think about how the whole world functions. And you get like little hints of like, oh yeah, what if you're just a toy that's in a crane game?
Right, exactly.
But it's not until we get to the later Toy Stories where they really think about like different pocket worlds. The idea
Right.
of like, oh, they're in a toy store. There's an entire wall of Buzz Lightyears who would basically be factory setting. Or
Right,
like,
yeah. Or that there are
oh,
people collecting like,
Yeah,
you know,
the
that
idea
aren't playing with
that's-
them.
right. The idea that some toys kind of like being antiques and being
Right.
like pristine.
Right.
Or like obviously in the third one, the entire daycare, or in the fourth one, the carnival, or the antique
Right.
shop. Like, yeah, like the first one is way more about character than it is world building. It's just the bare minimum world building of toys are real. For some reason, they've decided they don't want people to know that. So whenever like
Right.
a person comes, they go limp.
Right, exactly. I was gonna segue to. I'm like all over the road today. I feel like this.
Oh yeah,
That's just the
This
nature
is-
of this conversation.
Again, it's like the movie. It's jazzy. It's freeform.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, like in terms of world building, it's also like it's the little things, like how the coffee machine makes a gross fart poop sound, or that the fact that they
and
take
what
like a.
is that they're drinking? Sludge? They just.
I'm hoping. Hope.
It's
Like the fact that this movie can take like a good 2 minutes of like our characters walking down the street and you seeing like different monsters and how they interact with the world. Kids
Right.
using a tongue as a jump rope, goopy guy falling through the grate because he forgot that he's a goopy guy.
I
The
also
size differences.
the insane size differences. Oh, wait, did you ever catch the joke? I just remembered something off of what you just said about the goopy guy falling through the grate. And he falls through the grate and he says, "Great." Have you ever heard that joke? I was like, this is the first time I've ever noticed that joke when I watched it back this week.
That's what I mean. This has such a like sort of like. Well, it's the energy of white guys in Hawaiian shirts who
Yes,
like are like
yes,
Borscht Belt
it's dad
comedians.
jokes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's dad jokes. That's why Pixar became the dad animation studio.
Right, exactly.
Like
You know-
even beyond the fact that this is about two guys becoming a surrogate parents.
Right. I think like what is I think all of the sort of like mundane what's the word for it? Like sort of pedestrian stuff is the stuff that tickles me the most. Like I love seeing Mike Wazowski interact with Roz, like, and her kind of like pestering him to turn in her paperwork or his paperwork or whatever. Like I don't know why I'm sort of like it's that stuff is most amusing. But I think that's like to your point, yeah, that's how you like kind of rope in the adults.
Right.
Like more or less. Not that they have no reason to be enjoying this otherwise, but like I feel like that's always been the unique charm of this, and what makes Monsters University also charming from a different angle is because it's like it's not just about like, oh, this is a monster version of like things in the real world you already recognize, but it's like it's interactions that you recognize that are exactly mirrored like beat for beat as they would be in real life.
Right. Do we want to talk about design before we get into Monsters U? Because we did, audience, we were planning on talking about both of them because Monsters
Yes.
U is one of the most confounding films in my head in terms of I don't know what to think about it.
Well, yeah, let's do design, and then I kind of want to like I do have some more points about the plot that always interested me of Monsters Inc. Okay, yeah. So this is like Disney has iconic like for some reason masters color theory, and
Right.
somehow knows how to balance different contrasted colors together that make them like unmistakable. Because it's like, as I was watching this, not only like are we familiar with that teal that Sully is, or that like lime green color that
Just that
Mike is, but that
Obnoxious lime green.
pencil yellow is almost more iconic, like that the SWAT team wears.
Yes. That's so funny because a part of me was like, why do I associate this film with yellow so much?
Yeah. Right, and I didn't realize that until returning to it for this episode of like how iconic those, Scream canisters are in and of themselves.
Right. It is, yeah, again, it's a masterclass in iconography. Like, if there's one
Yeah.
thing an animated film really needs to succeed at, like, independent of, like, obviously writing and, like, it's iconography. Because it's, like, they're literally drawings, or in this case, computer renderings. Like, again, perfect design between, like, if Buzz and Woody are just fun because they're completely different genres, like,
Right.
Mike and Sully are perfect because they are like they're like in terms of like the Abbott and Costello sort of comedy duo thing. You've literally animated them to be exact polar opposites of each other. And again,
Right.
I also think it helps that neither of them look particularly scary just on their own.
Right. Maybe
Like, again,
maybe Sully does. Just
yeah,
because
'cause he's
he's
big.
massive. Yeah.
Yeah, but like again, I think this movie gets underrated because it followed Toy Story 2, which has this huge emotional gut punch of
Oh,
like
right.
Jesse's backstory, whereas like Boo getting scared by Sully isn't obviously doesn't have the pomp and circumstance of that, but it is like an emotionally bleak, like dark scene. They have like basically our audience like our innocent character turn on the protagonist so
Right.
extremely.
Exactly. The one who's supposed to be the hero. Right.
Yeah. And
This
then when
film-
you think they're at the rock bottom, it's like, no, actually, it turns out the guy who runs this company is a fucking maniac, and he's going to shove you into your
Right.
snow forever.
Exactly. You know, this film, I think, like, I guess what sets it apart from a franchise like Toy Story is that, like, it took 2 movies for them to get emotional gut punch, where it's like, if you're not in tears for, like, the entire third act of Monsters, Inc., I mean, like, I remember that very distinctly from when this, like, we've been, like, watching this as a young age, like, the emotional depth of this, like, destruction of this door.
Right. Yeah, even just the iconography of, like, or just, like, the image of, like, a door getting literally, like, a portal to this world just being destroyed, and you can never go back to that place.
Yeah,
Like,
it feels like the
that idea
child
of, like,
itself
oh,
has
childhood's
been
over.
destroyed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is like the adult thing of like someday this kid's gonna grow up and you're not gonna get to see them ever again. It's weird how many story parallels are between these two franchises, honestly.
Right.
And even just the idea of the iconography of a door, literally a door to a kid's bedroom,
Right.
like it's just so devious because they talked about like, and like Pete Docter talked about like I kind of came up with Monsters Inc. because like famously this was a part of their like iconic lunch meeting. It was like the end of the Toy Story 2 production, and they were just sitting down of like, okay, if this actually works and we pull this off and we think it's good, what kind of movies do we want to do after? And apparently like the big 3 that got pitched were Bugs Life, Finding Nemo, Wall-E, and Pete Docter came up with Monsters Inc. because he's like, well, what's another kids thing? What's like another universal kid experience beyond toys?
Right.
And the idea of monsters under a bed. So of course the image has to be a door.
Right.
And again, like I don't know how you get to the logic of an entire warehouse of doors.
Right.
Truly, like
You have
again,
to
even people
reverse
who don't-
engineer that entire thing. What is on the other side of the closet door?
Right. Yes, exactly. Like, and it's like, I don't know, they make mundane stuff seem so cool. Like, again, Toy Story and Monsters, Inc., it's like, we're not really going to the most riveting locales. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a cool world because there's, like, big monsters and shit in it.
Right.
Like, there's all these colorful characters, but it's like, the sushi restaurant is not designed to look like a monster place. It is
No,
a sushi
it's a
restaurant.
hibachi restaurant. Yeah.
Yeah, complete with, like, a guy coming through and, like, the,
An
like,
octopus
chef
stewed.
screaming.
Yeah.
Yeah, being
Right.
like, ah! You know, Mike Wazowski's car is not built to be a monster car. It is a car.
Right, exactly. The only interesting thing is that their apartment with their like different sized furniture
Yes.
that's for the 2 of them.
Which is the only acknowledgement of, like, oh, this is a world where not everyone follows the same rough
Right.
physical measurements.
Design, yeah.
Yeah, and, like, I do think the best of Pixar gets that energy really well. It's one of the reasons why I kind of think Onward is a little underrated, because I really like how they do that with, like, traditional sort of D&D fantasy stuff.
Right.
I really, like, some of the time, like, I feel like a part of why Inside Out loses me at times is because we kind of lose that. It gets a little too fantastical for my taste.
Okay.
But, yeah, and also, like, iconic villain designs, too. Like, it's
Oh,
not just...
man.
It's not just Mike and Sully are iconic, but, like, again, purple going against green and blue just feels... Like, again, all
Right.
those colors simultaneously work well together, but they work well as, like, contrasts to each other.
Right, exactly.
the design of a serpent being your monster villain, and on top of that, he can also
Disappear.
blend in with the walls
And reappear. Yeah. Yeah, that's special.
They get more They get more mileage out of like just placing the camera in strategic spots where you're like, is he in the room right now?
Right.
Than I thought. And also, like, I don't know. I feel like Mr. Waternoose is underrated because everyone remembers the villain of this movie being Randall.
Right.
But, like, that bit where he's just chasing Boo and Sully at the very end of the movie.
He's still a massive
like, he's
spider.
Too scary. Yeah, he's, like,
crab
going on the
spider.
walls.
Yeah, I like, when I was revisiting this, when he's, like, making that grand speech at the beginning, I remember, like, taking a good look at him and all of his eyeballs and thinking, like, oh,
Right.
this is terrifying to have thought of, like, him starting from the bottom of this company, like, as a scare, like, oh, were you somebody's monster
Right.
at some point?
That's the one world building thing that's interesting to me. The idea, like, the one part that I'm not, like, fully sold on, the idea that it's the same monster every single time. I thought that was an interesting, like, lore bit where I'm like, I don't know what to think of that. Like, I guess that's the one thing
What do
where I'm like,
you think that's not a good idea, or is it not realistic?
that's the thing, I can't tell. That's the
Okay.
problem where I'm like, I feel like the idea is you should switch it up a lot, so it's like,
So they don't get used to you?
I guess? I don't know. But that's like me, like, that's being cinema sinsy about and overthinking it.
Okay. Well, wasn't there like, you know, I felt like there were other elements to, oh, well, I guess that this goes into Monsters U when we get into the, like, the different classes that they were in, like, you learn that there's more to scaring than, like, being scary. There are, like, different things that kids are scared of. Like, don't they sort of,
Right.
like, go into the, like, the academia side of the science of
Yes.
being scary? Yeah.
Do you want to dive into Monsters U a little bit? You were the one who suggested, like, we
do.
should really do both.
I
so you
do.
have the floor.
Okay, Monsters University. First of all, there's a large time gap between these two films. This isn't really a sequel. This is a prequel.
Yes.
Which, like, okay.
Mid-quel bit at the end. Yeah.
Right.
It's 2001 versus 2013. So 12 years.
No, I remember this very distinctly. I remember seeing this in theaters in one of those situations where, I don't know how often, and this may be a girl thing, but, like, later you're like, was I just on a date?
Oh my god, that's so funny. There's so many... Well, no, I have a bunch of movies where I'm like, why the fuck did I see that in theaters? And I'm like, oh yeah.
Like, yeah,
In what universe did I decide to do this?
yeah, I remember seeing it with this, like, guy. Anyway, but I remember this being, like, we were, like, it felt very topical because we were, like, on our way to college, or we were, like, this was our junior year, so we were, like, beginning to think
Oh yeah.
about this. Like, so I remember it feeling really relevant at the time in a kind of exciting way, at least personally. But I do remember seeing this in theaters. First of all, I remember being really, like, jazzed about this. Because it was just fun. Like, this is just sort of like, I feel like all of the world building of the first one really pays off because there's such minimal explaining that you have to do.
Right.
Jumping into, like, okay, well, if that's what the professional sector looks and sounds like and feels like, here's what here's what teenagers are doing. Here's what school looks like. Like, here is
Right.
what growing up looks like for these
Your brain
adults functioning.
logics that all of this stuff must exist, so it just
Right.
trusts once it starts moving that it makes sense.
Exactly. And, like, so this is the kind of film where you can really, like, have fun. Like, when I said before that, like, oh, their names are so plain and mundane, like, everything feels so grounded and human-like, but, like, this is where they have fun with the kind of monstery stuff, so to
Right.
speak.
Yeah, it is a really interesting movie.
Yeah.
I think a part of it is this was a weird period for Pixar where it felt like they weren't swinging for the fence. Like, because I'm trying to remember exactly where this falls in the Pixar timeline, but it's like,
Oh, I can't remember.
you know, it was after Cars, it's Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, Toy Story 3, arguably, like, their hottest streak, where it's like, they can't do any wrong, they're getting nominated for Best Picture, like, animated films are being nominated for Best Picture again, And then they do Cars 2, which is like, well, this will fund the next couple interesting projects.
Yeah.
And then it felt like everyone kind of turned on Pixar because Brave came out next, which was supposed to be, it's like, they're doing a princess movie? Hell yeah. And then it's weird and suck. Well, it doesn't suck, but it's like off-kilter. And you can tell they fired the director 40 minutes or 40% through and just kind of threw it together.
Right.
And yeah, Monsters U was another like, oh, so are they not the masters anymore? Are they not like the artistes? But then I'm like, yeah, but it's fun.
It's really fun. I think it was only ever supposed to be fun and an opportunity for licensed merchandise.
Right. I think they were like, why did we give up on this universe? Why have we not like done more with this?
Exactly.
Like not even shorts. And it's so like it's a gorgeous film. Like
it really is.
Say, going from this one to that one, you're like, man, early CGI was rough.
True.
And I think Monsters, Inc. gets away with it more than Toy Story because, like, one, there's less human characters, but two, because, like, you can kind of just lean into it with Monsters. You can be like, well, yeah, their world's gross. They have a deodorant called Low Tide.
Right. Yes.
For some reason, I always remember that bit from the trailer, and it always grossed me out as a kid. Like, any, like, allusion to bad sense, for some reason.
I remember that, yeah.
But it's like, oh, this is what this world looks like when you have a budget, so it can just be, like, color and vibrant, and you can really play with, like, the weird designs more, because it's like, oh, we have the programs to handle this now.
In terms of design, like, it gets to just be a straight vibe, because, like, the aesthetic of college is really satisfying. Something is very satisfying about, like, old academia, where you have, like, these really old, almost castle-like buildings, almost like Princeton, where, like, the buildings are, like, there's all this cobblestone.
Older
and
than
these,
the nation they were founded in.
Exactly. Like, there is this element of prestige, but then, like, oh, there is this sort of youthful energy, and then you add this, like, marching band score, which is, like, nothing gets you more hype than a marching band. Like, what? Like, come on.
Aesthetically, they nailed this.
Right. Like let's not, like, sings perfectly.
Like, I get people not liking this movie. I get that continuity-wise,
I don't get it.
Breaks a lot of things.
Maybe,
in terms of, like, the timeline. But, like, I kind of don't care when you're just in the vibe and you're just running around with these characters having a good time.
Exactly.
And, like, it's just especially funny seeing, like, the expensive version of Monsters, Inc. Because famously, like, the big problem with the first one was basically every single Pixar movie, they're inventing some program to keep the film from exploding.
Right.
Because it's, like, the big problem with Monsters, Inc. was, like, there was no technology for hair yet. And, like, we saw this when we went to that Pixar museum they did at the Franklin Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, computer programs follow strict rules about, like, physics, where it's like, oh, if an arm is here, it's got to move here. That's why toys were good, because it's like, well, they're hard plastic, they have very rigid rules.
They only do so much.
Yeah. Even Slinky, it's like, well, there's a finite amount a Slinky can stretch, so we kind of have it under control. Like, there's one direction it can go in.
Right.
So there would be all these, like, demos of Sully, like, running, and then his hair just falls off because the computer goes like, yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's like, and I don't know, I kind of, like, I really love the conceit. I really love the emotional arc they give Mike Wazowski here. Like,
me too.
I love that, like, again, to credit to Billy Crystal, like, it's like, how did, he somehow finds another note here, where it's like he still sounds like a sleazy New York comedian, but has an inexplicable,
but also like an underdog
optimism here.
Yeah.
It's interesting seeing that as an underdog thing.
And the other side of that, it's interesting to see, like, our humble hero actually, like, start out as a total, nepo
a legacy
douchebag. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it is impressive that they make that work, especially because it's, like, it has the Star Wars prequel problem of, like, well, we already know where the story's going to end up. How do you make it compelling in spite of that?
That's true.
Like, but yeah, like, I think I mentioned this, Mike Wazowski was actually a big inspiration for, like, a project I've been working on, because I love this idea of a character who knows everything about a subject, like, knows it in and out, who's, like, a scholar of it, but fundamentally can't do it himself.
Right.
Like, there's just something missing, like, I like that this acknowledges, like, unfortunately, sometimes there is, like, a spark that you need to have, or, like, a physical gift you need to have to do something.
Yeah.
No matter how hard you try, there is a limit, and it's like, the people who end up the happiest and most successful figure out how to succeed in spite of that. find
Right.
their avenue, find their way. Like, I like how much of this movie is just like, and again, maybe a part of it's again another film in the trope of like the off kilter weirdos finding a way. Mm-hmm. But like, yeah, they end up in a fraternity as pointedly like, oh, the rejects who actually do have useful skills and abilities. They just need
Right.
to be like
Honed
encouraged
in.
to use them.
Yeah.
Like, even the guy who's like a weirdly topical bit about like a like 40-something dad going back to college to like
Right.
improve his career prospects somehow finds a way to be scary.
Right. Yeah. And you know, we talked briefly about the first one being kind of gross. I think this one is much more gross.
It kind of is. It's weird, which is funny because it looks so much prettier. Your brain should be able to like detach it, but yeah, there's so many like different sequences that are kind of just about like gross out. The bit where they're like ballooning up from the bioluminescent spiky
You know,
things.
I really love this vehicle of the like sorority games that they're playing or whatever. Like that's such a good idea. But yeah, one of them is these bioluminescent allergens essentially that like could actually do damage to you. I mean, like, is this hazing?
Yeah, it gets a little far. I mean, look, let's just say the fraternity culture, I think we've all had our eyes open the last
Right.
decade or so
Yeah,
about the ills of
agree.
fraternity culture. It is funny that, like, this film feels nostalgic for me, even though I went to a college that was pointedly not like this at all,
Yeah. Yeah, it was
like,
pretty
aesthetically or,
non-traditional.
like, pace-wise.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, it's like the fraternity games thing works like gangbusters. Like, I like that the sort of culmination of it is a recreation of, like, the opening scene of Monsters, Inc. Like, the idea of, like, oh, this is just a tool that exists in this world. And I will say, for all of my, like, misgivings about this movie, about, like, it's kind of just, like, it's made in, like, you know, it's a fun time, but it lacks a little bit of emotional spine. Like, can I just say, the final act, like, basically everything, like, the entire final act of this movie, it might be some of the best stuff Pixar's ever done. So, like, if you guys haven't seen this movie, basically the idea is Mike realizes he's not scary. It turns out that Sully sort of rigged the final competition to give him an advantage. And to prove him wrong, Mike goes into the human world, specifically, like, a summer camp, with the intention of scaring a bunch of
Awful.
kids.
Right.
Yes. Terrible idea. Bad. And again, keep in mind, and I guess this is the weird, like, and the fact that this is working in spite of our fact of, like, oh, this isn't actually that dangerous. Like, humans aren't toxic. They'll be
Right.
fine. Like, and the way it is shot and designed, it's like, oh, this is why it's cool that Pixar has money now. Because it's,
Right.
like, almost black and white. Like, the lighting
is unnerving.
so... Yeah. We go from this, like, uber-saturated, like, sort of nostalgic, like, everything's,
Autumn.
like, summery and fall-colored,
Yeah.
yes. All the monsters are candy-colored.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they really lean into the color for this one. To get an area where it's, like, lighted like almost a horror film.
Yeah.
Like, it's uncomfortably naturalistic.
Right.
And this was, like, before Good Dinosaur, where they really leaned into, like, photorealism as,
Mm-hmm.
like, a lighting and aesthetic choice. Like, to have that, and then, like, you never see a person's face, but you always see their bodies. Like, you see the
Right.
kids' bodies, like, eventually camp counselors and, like, sort of park rangers come in, and we never see their faces, so they're just this weird, like, mass, they're this weird horde that's,
Right.
like, chasing our heroes. Like, Sully goes in after him, and he's, like, running for his life because they're like, oh shit, there's a bear! And, like, the tension, and then it just it culminates in this, like, weirdly chill, like, melancholy scene where they're just sitting by a lake, and,
Right.
like, the line that gets me, like, well, like, Sully has two different lines where he's like, you know, I can't do it. I'm scared all the time, man. Like, you know, I'm supposed to be this amazing thing, and I'm not.
Yeah.
And then Mike goes, I really wish you could have told me that earlier. And Sully just goes, yeah, well, we weren't friends then. And I'm
Right.
just like, damn.
Dang it.
And then, like, we get this triumphant moment of them actually scaring a bunch of humans. And,
Right.
like, I will say, again, it's like, if the end point of a movie, this movie's weirdly like Wreck-It Ralph 2 for me, where I'm like, look, was it necessary? Eh.
Absolutely not.
Like,
yeah.
Does it reach the full potential of the studio? Eh.
Not that either, yeah.
But does it have a emotional idea at the end that kind of justifies the journey? Like, do you end up in a place that's worth it? That, like, someone
Right.
here had something they wanted to say with the art of storytelling that made it worth all the other stuff that was just fun. Abso-fucking-lutely.
Certainly. Yeah.
Like, yeah, the idea that these two find a way to make it work in spite of their unconventional, like, they don't get to go to college, they don't get to go to college, but they'll figure out a different way. There are paths
Which
for
is
everyone
insane
in life.
when you know how it ends. Like when you when you know what the future looks like, that they were immensely successful in their careers.
Yeah, and like I think that's like a story that was very good for like the 2013. Like that's not a story we tell in film a lot, especially not animation.
Right.
The idea of like you can fail. You can fail egregiously, as a matter of fact, and still figure it out. These two weirdos found a way.
Right.
And you just have to turn your brain off a little bit to remind yourself that what they're doing is ethically wrong and kind of evil.
We'll address that later. Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry.
It's not
There's
ethically
another
wrong.
whole
It was a
film
different
that like they
time.
do the right thing.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
and then they find a way, a different way, because they discover they can just make kids laugh.
Right, exactly. Which is
Truly
fascinating.
Can I just say, I feel like one of the best, like, most well-observed sequences in this entire series is Mike Wazowski doing the stand-up, and he's trying to do, like, observational comedy, like, self-deprecating humor, and finally he just says, fuck it, and burps.
Right.
And the kid is
Absolutely
losing his ragdolling with his arms.
That's one of my favorite memes, is that particular child just, like, staring.
Just, what the fuck is this? How are my parents not hearing any of this?
Right.
He has a microphone.
I woke up for this, yeah.
I'm not getting my full 8 hours for this.
To this day, I wish I had gotten my hands on some Monsters University merch, because they made merch as if this was a real college. Like, they made hats and t-shirts and mugs that were, like, genuine, as if you had gone there, or, like, if you'd gone on a tour, like...
I think I think one of the podcasts I listened to, one of them has a Monsters U hat.
I wanted one so bad, because they made it with, like, the same tear in it that, like, Mike's hat had or whatever. They probably still exist out there somewhere, probably on Disney's website, but...
I will say, as much as I love the opening of the movie, the John Krasinski jump scare, where you're like, you hear the voice and you're like, where do I know that? John Krasinski! I'm like,
Which one was John Krasinski?
He's, like, the monster Mike looks up to, who, like, he sneaks in with, and he's like, kid, I didn't even see you. You could have been in a lot of trouble there. And then he goes, I didn't even see you.
Oh, I didn't know that was him. All I knew is that Aubrey Plaza was that girl, the monster that looks like Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah, where it's like,
that does
not really stretching our creativity.
Right, that does the Aubrey Plaza bit.
Yeah, but no shade. I love Scott Pilgrim, and they did the exact same thing.
Right.
Well, it's kind of interesting you bring that up, because they recently announced she's coming back for Monsters at Work, which is the part of the franchise. I don't know if you ended up watching. I ended up watching a little bit of the pilot.
I didn't know.
So the idea is it's like a direct sequel. Literally, the beginning of the first episode is like right after Waternoose gets carted off. And the idea is like, it's a workplace comedy centered around them transitioning to laughs.
Okay.
And the main character is a graduate of Monsters U who is like top of his class. He's like, he gets recruited by Waternoose specifically. Like, hey, no audition, no job applicant, just come. You're the guy. And he's literally coming in as like everyone's having a panic attack. Like the receptionist office is getting swamped with like, hey, do we still have jobs? Like, does the company exist anymore?
Right.
And he realizes like, I trained my entire life for this specific field that doesn't exist anymore. Which again is another interesting, like, I don't know. I like when Pixar uses their clout to tell stories with interesting angles.
Right.
And I feel like there is a story to be said for people who trained in hand-drawn animation at Cal Arts only discover that CGI is the way of the future.
Was king? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's definitely something I need to sit down and watch. Like, I think I'd get a kick out of it.
Yeah, me too.
I feel like it kind of got buried because it was one of those things they announced super early for Disney Plus when, like, whereas now we're in, like, the era of, like, all the companies quietly acknowledging that streaming was a mistake.
Right. Something interesting that I've been thinking about, like, I don't know about you, but, like, every now and again, I've always come across somebody that, like, I don't think we've ever properly had this conversation, but, like, there are people walking this earth who genuinely view, like, Disney and Pixar as like two separate entities. And I've never been able to articulate like why that's incorrect.
I mean, it's weird because like they've basically been at the hip since Pixar existed.
Right.
Like originally Pixar was like originally Pixar was like a part of like Lucasfilm, I believe, like the technology sort of spun off of that. But like Disney did the first distribution deal. To be fair, there was a period where Pixar was looking beyond Disney. Like they had famously gotten a bunch of different arguments about their contract. Like Toy Story 2 was kind of like the big spark plug because Disney was like, we're commissioning you to do Toy Story 2, but it doesn't count toward your current contract, so we have different terms. And they're like, fuck you, we're not doing that. We're not wasting resources on a sequel. And like basically they were like at each other's throats the entire time. And for a while it looked like Pixar was going to try and move on. They were going to try and find a different distribution company. Like at one point there was talk of even doing a live action film with Warner Brothers, I believe. They because Brad Bird really wanted to do a film about the San Francisco earthquakes, and they were like, oh, we can do this with Pixar. You know, you like all of us. And it was going to be a whole thing. And then, as we said, Bob Iger was like, yeah, let's not fuck around with this.
Right.
Like I don't know if you noticed, but we just released Home on the Range.
So we're gonna need that back.
We can't fuck around about this.
Right. Yeah, I just like, to me, it's unfathomable to think of these characters not being Disney characters.
Right. It is. Right. It is weird. And again, that's the thing. Like Bob Iger noted, that's like, man, every character post 2000 in this park is a Pixar character.
Right. Huh.
Like, and like we didn't even really talk about them during our Disney 100 celebration, but it is weird to think about like how much of like this company's iconography is built by Pixar. Pointedly, a different animation studio who they happen to own. Right.
Exactly. And it's like, it's so weird because it's like, you know, until you just explained all of that, you know, I've never thought of Pixar as an acquisition in the same way that I think about Lucasfilm or Marvel.
Right.
Or Fox, for that matter. Like, but maybe that just has more to do with my being an adult now when those things happened, and and having always been introduced to Pixar and Disney in the same hand.
That might be a part of it. I mean, it fundamentally feels different because there's not an era of Pixar's existence where they made a film that wasn't Disney.
True. Yeah.
Like, Marvel got all the way to Avengers. Like, Avengers was the last film they made under...
Paramount?
Shit, was it Paramount? Yeah, it was Paramount. Which, like, man, what person fucked up that bad at Paramount to let that happen?
Right, that
like,
guy's
they're
fine.
dead, right?
Yeah,
like,
they're
they
in the
got fed
ditch.
to the company Tyrannosaurus.
Right, exactly.
Like, I can't imagine fumbling the bag that much. But to be fair, people didn't know Avengers. Like, people did not think Avengers was going to be the third highest grossing film of all time.
Right.
Like, a film that literally cleaned Disney's books for, like, a calendar year, where it's like, oh, we can release anything can fuck up.
Right.
And we'll be fine. Yeah, it's so interesting. I don't know. I have a special place in my heart for Monsters, Inc. 2, because it's like, again, it's a successful... Like, it was successful. Like, its opening weekend, it had the second highest grossing Saturday of all time. Like, it was... Like, it almost beat Toy Story 2's opening weekend record. Like, it was a success, objectively. But, like, pointedly, this was the first year there was a best animated picture, and it lost to fucking Shrek. It's so weird to think two different companies made, like, monster movies. Famously, like... Shrek was, like, this incredibly bungled production. Like, originally it was going to be hand-drawn, then they transitioned it to CGI, and then Chris Farley died. Mike Myers apparently recorded, like, all of the audio pretending to be Chris Farley, only to be like, what if he's Scottish? And they had to throw everything out. Like, that movie went through some shit. And it's so weird to think, like, for, like, how different the reputations around the companies are now.
Right.
That, like, there was a point where it's like, DreamWorks, those guys are the new kings of animation. Sit your ass down, Pixar. Even though, like, the entire joke was they made an animated Best Picture so they could give Pixar things.
Right.
Like, it's like, oh, this is the Pixar award. They can get it. And they didn't get it until 2 years later with Finding Nemo. And then even Monsters U, like... I just feel bad that it's considered this distressed asset, and I really feel bad for the director Dan Scanlon, because it's like, oh, this is to prove you can direct a movie, then you can make whatever you want. And then he's like, I want to make Onward. Cool. Oh, there's a pandemic, it's on Disney Plus
Never mind. Yeah.
2 weeks. It got to be in the box office for 2 fucking weeks before the hammer came down.
Oh God.
Like, it's such a bummer.
Right.
But, like, the more we talk about it, I'm like, I really think they should at least... Again, like, look, I know there's more Toy Story stuff. I know Toy Stories 1, 2 are, like, kind of impeccable. I kind of think Toy Story 4 is underrated. Bennett, my brother...
I still haven't seen it.
Yeah, my brother Bennett, like, is impassioned in his argument that, like, you know, I hate to say it, but I actually think Toy Story 4 is a better ending to the franchise than 3. And I'm like, I believe it when I see it, but...
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I have, but I guess, I mean, I need to think about it more, but I don't think he's wholly wrong.
Okay.
I think where the characters end up works even better.
Okay.
But, yeah, like, I think Monsters, Inc. should at least, like, as a franchise, should be propped up a little more.
I would agree.
Like, why is there no Monsters, Inc. stuff in the parks right now for Halloween? Why is it all Oogie Boogie right now? Like, surely, a little bit of Monsters, Inc. love.
Those costumes are cumbersome.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's
traditionally,
it's
like,
not as easy to, like, coexist.
That's, like, as weird as an angle as this is, because I know a little bit about this side of the parks, of having almost worked there. Like, the Pixar costumes are, like, notoriously problematic. Not like, including, like, the Incredibles costumes, like, the full costume. They're the ones to have known to have, like, the most malfunctions, to, like, need the most, like, those people need an assistant. Like,
It is interesting.
Not to,
they did
excuse
not
them.
design... Yeah, they did not design any of these characters to have... And I wonder if that's a part of why Pixar has such an appeal to a certain group of, like, animation people. Because it's like, oh, they don't make stuff for your amusement park, bro.
Yeah, right. It is a bro. Like, I'm glad you're bringing this up today, that, like, Pixar is the dad bro company.
Yeah, and, like, well, it's interesting because it's, like, both the dad bro, but also the nerdy. Because it's, like, again, going back through their original films, like, toys, Bugs and Samurai, monsters,
Bugs and Samurai.
Ocean's cool,
Right.
superheroes. And a part of, like, someone had an interesting theory about part of the reason why Cars got turned on so hard, despite not being that bad and just kind of being, is because it was about NASCAR. It was specifically about, like, a more, like, redneck jockey sort of thing.
Right.
And
they do,
like,
lean into that sort of part of the country. Like,
yeah. Again, they got Larry the Cable Guy
right,
to
exactly.
be a main character. But yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why, like, these sort of later Pixar films have gotten such, like, I mean, there's a number of reasons. But, you know, a part of it is because they put them all on streaming and that flattens everything.
Right.
But, like, Soul, Luca, and Turning Red, particularly Turning Red, is, like, an explicitly female film.
Right, yeah.
But even Soul and Luca are, like, a lot softer and more, like...
Yeah, gentle.
Not effeminate, but more, like, sensitive in
Right,
terms of,
they
like,
are.
its emotional pattern.
Right.
That I think that's why they're not, like, you know, why traditional Pixar people are like, oh, it's fallen off.
Right, right.
But I'm like,
I
they kind
agree.
of just released 3 of their best films back to back.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of just went 3 for 3. Like, again, if Soul is the worst of those 3, you're in
That's
the
pretty
pocket.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, we went back to Dude Bro stuff. We did Lightyear, and again, we don't need to litigate Lightyear anymore. Yeah, I really hope that doesn't come back to bite either of us in the ass.
I know.
I don't know.
Well.
I feel the fact that Pixar talks about it so little, I feel like we're safe.
Right.
I feel like they're even like,
Yeah.
look, we know.
We know.
Fine.
Yeah. They all know.
Any other thoughts you wanted to get out? I'm trying to think. Like,
I really don't
there's so many
have
different
much.
angles you can talk about it. But, like, oh, well, one thing I love is, again, like, I love that, like, you know, these films are, like, Cracker Jack tight, particularly Monsters, Inc. Like, all those early Pixar films, it's like, there's not a ounce of fat wasted. Like, they take advantage of every minute. And yet we still have room for this ridiculous, like, Looney Tunes bit where Sully thinks Boo is being crushed in a trash compactor.
Oh my
and
god!
we just
and
keep
he
cutting to his
carries
reactions.
around. He
Right,
keeps
it's literally a fucking Looney Tunes bit with, like, the bulldog thinking his little, like, friend got cooked.
Right.
And, yeah, he's, like, holding
about
this
that.
cube
Crying.
of trash, and it's like, Sully, that's trash.
Right.
Yeah, just the different reactions to him fainting.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
There's so many dumb bits like that.
Oh, don't
like
even get me started on the emergency. We got a 2319. 2319. Like, what? Like, why do they believe that humans are toxic?
It's just easier to.
It's just something to do.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's hilarious.
It helps you emotionally detach from scaring them.
That they incinerate this, like, baby sock.
Yes.
On the floor.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Like, I love that these films are, and I guess that's the advantage of the animated form, right? You can have this weirdly, like, grounded domestic film about, like, workplace angst and, like, becoming a dad. But also, because it's a cartoon, you can have, like, oh, there's a sock! And watch as, like, yellow-clad men in yellow.
Through
through the windows.
Right. Drop in. Hold everybody hostage for a second. Shave a guy. Completely traumatize him.
Or, like, when they're running away from the restaurant, it's like, I can't imagine that could have went any worse. And the entire area is engulfed in a green light. Apparently, originally, they just blow up the restaurant, but they're like, 9/11 happened, they're like, we can't do that.
Yeah.
We can't. One thing I don't think we've ever talked about is, like, these sort of bloopers for these movies. Like, originally, Pixar would always have the blooper segments.
These animated bloopers.
Where they would take, like, bad audio, like unusable audio or B-roll, and just animate around it.
Right.
There's some. One of my favorites is the guy slamming into the glass, like as they're all breaking through the glass, one person just hits the wall and falls. Or the fact that they do a whole segment for Put That Thing Back Where It Came From, or So Help Me.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That's the thing. As we're saying this, iconic. I'm like, man, we have so many little pop culture references ingrained in our culture from this movie, and you wouldn't think that.
No, but, like, even watching this, I remember, like, again, I talk about, like, us seeing ads over and over again, and you can see the commercial verbatim. That, the bit where they're, like, doing their morning warm-up, that, like, scary feet, and a bunk bed. Yeah. Which is insane. Like, that is so funny.
Scary monsters don't have plaque.
Yeah.
Fight that plaque. Yeah. Or the bit where Boo sneezes directly into Mike's eye. And he goes, sprays. And then we cut back to him like 2 minutes later and his eyes blood red.
Right.
And I'm like, all right, maybe we tone down the realistic textures here just a little bit.
Exactly, right. Or like when they first bring Boo to the apartment and she's just having a grand old time coloring and she goes like, and they're just like throwing her Cheerios like from across the room. Like she just has like, this is like the best night of her life.
Again, it's like, that's the magic, especially of early Pixar, where it's like, again, not a minute is wasted, yet we still find room for these things. It's so economical how they, like, find the perfect way to get, like, visual storytelling in, or, like, comedic storytelling in.
Exactly.
Like it's also funny I keep calling this film gross. The film looks way better than I remember, but I also think, again, my brain is thinking about Shrek, and how that movie looks like diarrhea.
Right, like, because it is, it's a story about diarrhea.
Yeah. Shrek, a story about diarrhea.
It really is.
Look, someday we'll probably at least acknowledge Shrek on the main feed. My stance is the first one is fun but not great. The second one is genuinely great because it is a better realization of all the themes.
Right.
Like, again, I just can't get past as an adult. They're like, be yourself, let your freak flag fly. But let's dunk on this short king. Oh, look at this little inept guy. His
not
penis
you.
is probably the size of a thumbtack. Yeah, not you. You. Spit on him.
Right.
Actually fucking murder him.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, I think that is the difference between DreamWorks and Pixar. Pixar understood, like, look, this technology is in its nascent state. Like, it's not perfect. We need to find ways around the fact that it's not perfect aesthetically. Like, we need to figure out how to be aesthetically pleasing with what we have. And early DreamWorks CGI was like, we don't give a fuck.
Right.
Let's make him, like, gross green and everything brown.
Right. I feel like DreamWorks was kind of emboldened by the success of their, like, earlier 2D films.
Yes.
Like the Sinbad. It is kind of insane that they went
from, like, some of the most immaculate hand-drawn animation in the world to that.
Looking back at those, even those were like, this is an adult film. Like, those really films had really mature themes sometimes.
Yeah. No, their films, like, were really thought out. Even, like, Road to El Dorado, which is a goof. Like, they don't have bones about, like, if the Spanish find this place, they are going to slaughter everyone and take it. It is going to be a genocide.
Right.
Like, we cannot let them find this place. It is so interesting, like, this transition point of, like, one Pixar I mean, and it didn't last for long, because again, Pixar then
Sure.
did Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, Wall-E,
Right.
Up. Like, they were back on top pretty
Right.
quick against DreamWorks. Like, and Monsters, Inc., unfortunately, is the one left holding the bag in terms of, like, oh, well, Monsters, Inc., that was... Whereas, like, fucking... People forget Shrek got nominated for Best Screenplay. Like, Best Adapted Screenplay. That's how, like, in Shrek fever swept the nation.
Right.
Like, I do
Shrek
feel like we
fever.
underrate how, like, quickly DreamWorks took over and how quickly Pixar responded and, like, kind
Yeah.
of left them in the dust.
Right.
Whereas now I'd argue it's kind of a slightly more balanced, although I'm more partial to, like, recent DreamWorks movies than some. Like, I really like Bad Guys.
Oh, I still haven't seen it.
It's well, one, it's very funny because, like, it is funny what you pick up on, like, because, like, I worked in a bookstore for a while, audience, as you probably know, and it's, like, so funny where you see all these different books and you're like, oh, they made a movie based off that, they made a movie based off that. You're like, god damn, are all these movies based off kids' books?
Yeah.
Evidently. But, yeah, do you have any, like, other thoughts you want to get out as we're wrapping up?
I think we've covered just about everything. There isn't a whole lot to talk about, which I think, like, I say that to the credit of Monsters, Inc. That, you know, sometimes I feel like the more talking we do, it's not for a good reason.
Yeah, you're trying to articulate things, whereas this film, it's, like, it's very easy to explain why it's
easy.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy to, like, yeah. I was gonna say, like, if we can succinctly explain why we think a thing is good in an hour, they probably did a good job
Then
on their
that's
own
it.
selling people on it.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's, like, I am really glad you did this because, like, I forgot how much I loved that first Monsters Inc.
Oh, yeah.
Because this was absolutely a film that was on all of the time. This was one where it's like the parents felt comfortable watching it. They're like, this is
Right.
humor we can all
enjoy this. Yeah.
Like, Mike Wazowski is, like, a cultural character for my family, like, a iconic, like, reference point.
A Polish figure.
Again, Pope John Paul II,
Mike Wazowski.
Copernicus, Mike Wazowski.
Right.
Polish people who made a difference.
Right.
I'm getting cursed for that one. I need to keep my head on a swivel the rest of the day. Here's my final question. Do you consider this a Halloween film?
No, but you know what?
That's the weird thing, right?
I don't consider this a Halloween film, even though in our main feed episode this week we talk about ABC Family and the 13 Nights of Halloween / 31 Nights and how lazy they've become over time, and this so would have been grandfathered in as a show that like 4 times during the
Especially, they have a lot of spots for Monsters U, and again, like, we both agree Monsters U is kind of good, but, like,
Right.
it is not it's not a Halloween movie. It's a summer
No.
movie.
It's just like it's just these are summer fall movies that, like, if anything, they're Thanksgiving movies, but, like, yeah,
Right.
they're not strictly Halloween. They just have monsters, and if you
Yeah.
do the math in your brain, monsters, Halloween, cool.
They
That's
are
why
way
I brought
too
it up
laid
today.
back and jazzy to be Halloween movies.
No, yeah, yes, that's exactly it. They are jazzy. Which is like another Pixar thing. Which again, like, to describe it as dad animation, like,
Yeah.
what else would it be than Randy Newman
I like
and good old jazz? Yeah. Especially, I mean, like, look at these opening sequences. Even, you know, it opens with this door sequence, and we're just
Yes.
grooving to this, like,
Yeah.
to this jazz bit. Like yeah,
I forget
this
how
is
awesome
great.
that opening is.
It really
Again,
is
they
perfect.
sell you on this so quickly. And it also, I'm like, god damn, can Pixar just get to make a hand-drawn animated? Like, I know that's not why
Right.
the company exists, but could they try it at least once? Just
Right.
once.
I know.
Just give them the pencils and paper. Like, clearly
They
they have
can do
enough
it.
people at the company who know how to draw.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
you know, all these people, like, there's a, like
Went to
obviously a lot
school
of
for
animation
this.
has become tech-based now because
Yeah.
it's, like, you know, working with the technology. But, like, especially the early guys, they all went to Cal Arts. They learned traditional animation. That's why the early films were so good, despite the technology being so, like, cluttered.
Right.
Because they could tell, like, traditional hand-drawn stories with like, this new technology.
Right. Yeah, agreed.
And until we light up another door and go through to another world of monsters and scary little critters and little optic knives, I'm Carter.
And I'm Sydney.
Have a magical day.
Thanks for listening.
Seriously though, the phrase "little optic naive" in a weird sort of Bronxy Jewish accent
Is that what you were
very
going
funny.
for there?
He says it first, and he doesn't sing the rest of the song like that. He just goes, "And I'm a little optic naive," and I'm like, "Why are you leaning into your bit, sir?"
Listen, because that's the assignment, okay? He understood it.
Fair enough. Happy home.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, getting through Happy Home really pays off because then you can decorate your villagers' houses. Like you can
Really?
Yeah, that's the prize at the end of finishing Happy Home Academy is that you can customize and rearrange the furniture of your villagers, like on your.
You just show your little ID badge. It's like,
And
I'm the
they're
law,
like-
let me handle this.
And you're like, oh, yeah, and then you hold them hostage for a minute while you redecorate their houses.
Jesus. All right, here we go. Sorry, trying to hype myself up.
Okay.
Scary feet, scary feet, scary feet.
Yeah.